I'm getting performance anxiety because I have no one watching me. I'm going to highlight myself. Hello, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Kyle Doyle. I'm the manager of asset management at the Sunshine Coast Regional District. Tonight we are discussing Canoe Road, specifically the wastewater service and the capital funding plan around that. So we met in December and January of this winter, and we first discussed a preliminary capital plan, and tonight is just to update you on the status of the progression on that plan. Tonight's meeting is broadcast over both Zoom and YouTube. So if you're joining us on YouTube tonight, you won't have any options to engage with us, but you're able to email us at info@scrd.ca, and we'll get to your questions there. And if you are on Zoom, you're able to use the question and answer feature and raise hand feature to participate. So look forward to any questions. The presentation is about 25 minutes. And tonight we're joined by Cody Abbott, who is the Superintendent of Utility Operations. And we're also joined by Director Pratt, who is the elected official for Area B. I'm going to share my screen here and we'll get into the presentation. And if you have questions at the end, we'll be happy to take them. Okay, so as I said, we're discussing Canoe Road wastewater treatment, and this is the summer 2020 capital funding update in October. The map on the screen is the area that is defined by the Canoe Road wastewater service. If you do not reside within the blue line, tonight's discussion does not directly relate to you, but you're welcome to join us. We'll be keeping the questions to the capital funding of this specific wastewater service area for tonight. Topics we'll be discussing tonight. We'll talk about a previous review, just so everyone's on the same page and is up to date on the information. We'll go into a capital funding update, which is the meat of the presentation. And then we'll talk about what's coming up next. And if there are any questions, we'll take them there. And if you have questions later in the future, feel free to email us, as I said. So just a broad overview of the previous review. This started in 2019 with a wastewater service review, which was a high-level review of all 15 wastewater services managed by the SCRD. And that was accompanied by a series of asset management plans, which were service-specific plans that contained all the relevant information about wastewater service for each area. And those are found on the specific services web pages. We followed that up with some engagement sessions in the winter, as I said earlier. We had great feedback from the residents, and there was an opportunity to share our preliminary findings and let the residents know what we were seeing. To supplement that engagement, we started to put together some fact sheets, and these just a quick glance of the preliminary findings. We went after we engaged with the public and took the feedback and created a revised budget that we then presented to the board. And there were some wastewater services in the SCRD that had user rate and frontage fee adjustments to reflect the updated information. Some of the key findings from this 2019 wastewater service review. The primary one was that the existing revenue for many of the wastewater services was unsustainable. Particularly, operations budgets were often greater than the revenues generated from user fees, and this resulted in deferred contributions to reserve funds. We also found that future capital expenditures were not being planned for, and therefore the ratio of capital reserves to future capital expenditures was determined to be far too low. So just for those of us that weren't able to join us in December, we previously had a funding model that looked something like this. We collected frontage fees from all parcels within the service areas, and then we would collect user fees from all parcels that were occupied or connected to the service area. These two revenue streams were combined, and that formed the operating budget for each service area. and that was used to fund the annual expenditures and also contribute to capital and operating reserves. It's a little bit of a convoluted strategy, and we felt that needed to be revised. So when we speak about the key outcomes from this previous service review, one of them was the decoupling of user fees and frontage fees. And this means that going forward, user fee revenues only funds operations expenses, operations and maintenance, and frontage fees only fund capital expenses. We had an extensive review of operations and maintenance requirements, including an audit of the operations and maintenance activities at each treatment system. And then we revised the operations and maintenance budget to ensure that adequate funding was available for all activities we needed to do. And we also established a minimum reserve target for operations and maintenance reserves to make sure that when we needed money, it was available. This is a process that is ongoing, and we will continue to review it annually. We also developed a capital funding model to help us plan for future capital expenses. What's on the screen now represents the current funding model, and you can see it's a lot easier to understand. User fees fund operations and maintenance budget and contribute to the operations and maintenance reserve, and frontage fees fund capital expenditures and contribute to the capital reserve. Common question we got last year during the engagement sessions is, why do we need an operating reserve? And that's a fair question. Unforeseen expenses, repairs or whatever, can exceed the annual operating budget. And normally that's not a problem. If you think in your own context with your house, you may have a leak in your roof and you can go and borrow money if you don't have enough of it. But for services delivered by a regional district, that's not an option. We're not able to borrow for operational expenses, so it's important to have that money in the bank for a rainy day. Just want to reassure you that all reserve funds, especially operating and capital, all reserve funds for your service area are withdrawn only for your service area. So they aren't being used to finance any other services on the Sunshine Coast. Just a summary for Canoe Road specifically, the impact on wastewater rates last year was quite significant. A large part of this is we changed the plant at Canoe Road, and the operation requirements were not defined and known well to us. So when we did an audit of the necessary maintenance activities, we had to make sure we had enough money in the bank to cover the work that would be done every year. And it was also striking that we noticed the operation and maintenance reserve balance for this system was quite low. And so you'll see the user fees increased from $218.75 up $711 to $929.75. And additionally, there was an operation and maintenance reserve contribution amount that was set in place to establish a minimum reserve target. This is a 5-year levy, and if we reach the reserve target before then, it will be eliminated as and when it's met. So that's $146.83 a year. Another new fee from 2019 to 2020 is associated with the replacement of the plant. There is a debt obligation that has to be paid. So when we talk about operations and maintenance budget, that would be these items here. And when we talk about capital costs, that would be these items here. This debt obligation of $424.30 per parcel per year will be paid off when the debt's finished. And because there was a significant increase last year, we eliminated the $153 frontage fee, and we'll move forward from the debt obligation amount. So out of those engagement sessions we had last year, we had a lot of good feedback, and we felt like we listened to the residents. One of the first things we heard is that we were too conservative in our estimates, and I think that's a fair criticism. So we went back and we analyzed our historical SCRD contract data, and we wanted to refine our capital models and make sure that we didn't ask for more than we needed. We found we were able to reduce our engineering allowances by 3%, and we reduced our contingency amounts by 15%. We also heard that residents had a higher tolerance for debt than we had previously assumed. So where possible, we considered financing larger portions of upcoming projects. And then finally, the introduction of a potential rate increase caused some stress, and that's fair. The uncertainty of what was coming up was causing people a little bit of disconcern. So we're proposing going forward that there's a 5-year rate structure, and this would be revised annually, and it would provide residents and staff, of a little bit of certainty of their rates. We also updated the savings and borrowing rates to match current rates, and that's something we'll do on an annual basis. We also found that depending on the term of the anticipated loan, we were able to use lower rates depending on that, and so we use a variable borrowing rate based on how long we anticipate the term of the loan will be for the infrastructure we're to construct. Another a big change here is we applied a variable construction cost index to better reflect construction inflation over time. And so we were using a flat rate before, 5%, I believe, which was what we found in our preliminary investigation. The new data we found using the most preeminent estimating tools available, RS Means, develops a cost index of construction that is regionally, it's regional to Vancouver. And so we're able to find that if the construction is expected in the next 10 years, it's a different rate than if construction is expected in farther in the future. And so the importance of this is we reduce unnecessary inflationary effects where we can. So just a reminder, a lot of these points will be review again from the previous engagement session, if you recall. But some of the confining factors when we talk about infrastructure funding in a regional district specifically, we're bound by a framework put in place by the British Columbia provincial government, specifically the Local Government Act. It articulates the rules which regional districts can operate and provide services in. And one of the rules is that local service areas in regional districts can be funded only by participants. And that means that costs are shared by a small number of people. Another truism is that infrastructure degrades over time, and that means that as our systems get older, we're going to have reduced performance and higher maintenance costs. And so it's important that we, keep an eye on the infrastructure and replace it when necessary. And finally, as everyone knows, everything gets more expensive, so infrastructure costs inflate over time. I've said this before and I've been corrected. Sometimes computers get cheaper, but unfortunately wastewater plants aren't computers. And so we expect them to get more expensive over time. So a little broad strokes overview of how we make these financial models. We line up the expenditures. We develop a timeline of anticipated replacement using estimated useful life of the infrastructure. Where possible, we use the most recent replacement cost estimates. So, Canoe Road's a good example. We've recently put in a new treatment plant, and other systems that have a similar size and capacity, we might use the cost estimate from the Canoe Road treatment plant to predict the cost of future infrastructure in those plants. We inflate the cost estimates to the future value using construction cost indices I talked about earlier. And then where we anticipate borrowing money for some work, we will include the debt financing costs associated with that. And then on the flip side of the ledger, if we accrue a reserve balance, we will apply the annual interest rate we expect to earn on that accrual. The key point here is we do try to reduce the inflationary effects as much as we can by using the most recent replacement cost estimates. And we'll continue to keep our eyes peeled, and any information that we can apply to these estimates, we will. And then just a reminder for those of us that were here or weren't, your wastewater service has 3 main components, and they have pretty significant estimated useful lives. Treatment plants generally last about 50 years. Ground disposal systems last about 40 years, and collection systems last about 80 years. And so it kind of dictates how long we have to plan in the future. If we plan too short, we might not plan to replace anything, and then they enter the horizon of the study later on, and there's less time to prepare. And that brings me to my next point. Canoe Road, as everyone knows, recently had a treatment plant replaced. And so it's in a unique situation, fairly simple design, and there's not a lot of infrastructure here. We do have coming up in the near future, we anticipate having to replace or construct the collection system. And, that's the only thing in the next 30 years. And based on the historical rate increase, which has been $3.12 a year for Canoe Road, what I put on the graph now is the reserve balance we anticipate over the next 30 years. And you can see that gray line, it comes off the ground as we approach the collection system, and then it kind of stays low again. And this is reflecting what it would look like if we just maintain the historical rate increase that we've had over the last, since the creation of the system. And, in that same scenario, what we would see when we get to the collection system, similar to the replacement of the treatment plant, we would have a rate increase here from $452 to $689. And that's driven by the debt associated with this new piece of infrastructure. And we're trying to avoid jumps like that if possible, although that jump there really isn't that big of a deal because it's not that large. Now, if we take that same perspective and zoom out to a 50-year window, we capture the next treatment plant. So this is the replacement of the one we just built. And using the same historical frontage fee, if we had the escalation due to the debt in 2029 and increased it by 2%, the frontage fee and reserve balance would actually be sufficient to accommodate the debt associated with the future treatment plant. So Canoe Road, from a capital funding point of view, is not on that bad of a situation right now. For all the plants, we look at a 75-year window, and because it's a fairly simple system, there is no infrastructure in the 75-year window to look at, but we're going to keep it in a 50-year window just to make sure it's consistent with the rest of the capital plans we're developing. So I have three different scenarios to discuss today. One is going to be the safest case scenario, one where we have enough money to pay for all infrastructure. One will be a little bit less aggressive, and one is going to consider what happens if we get a grant for this collection system in 2029 and how that'll affect the rate structure. Because there is really not much to consider going forward other than the collection system and the treatment plant 50 years later, there isn't that many variables to see here. So right now, our frontage fee at $400 and some is driven by the debt we owe for the treatment plant. And this scenario on your screen right now shows the frontage fee going over a 2% annual increase. And we choose 2% because that is the CPI, or Consumer Price Index. Basically, that's the consumer inflation. And using 2% as an annual increase means that every dollar that someone spends in 2020 is equivalent to the buying power of the amount that dollar be worth if you inflate it by 2% in 2040. I may not have explained that perfectly, but I'm not a financial professor. I apologize. So what we see in this plan is a 2% annual increase from 2020 to 2069, and there's a 1 point in the next 50 years where we have a $164 increase due to debt from the collection system in 2029. And now on your screen, you can see the blue line represents the reserve balance we would see over this time frame. And we get to the replacement in 2069, 2070, and we have about 50% of the reserve, and that's a pretty healthy position to be in. So the other option we looked at, not considering a grant, is just increasing the fees by $50 a year for the next 4 years. And what that does is that gets rid of that jump where you see the debt-driven increase associated with the treatment plant, or the collection system in 2029, and allows us to maintain a 2% annual increase from 2025 onwards. Both these plans, as you can see from this slide, have a similar reserve balance going into that treatment plant replacement 50 years in the future, and both of these would work. This one puts a little bit more onus on increases for the next couple of years, but is overall less money collected, as you'll see in a little bit here. Finally, because we are aggressively pursuing grants, and I think that this collection system is in a window where grants may be available, we've just wanted to represent a plan where we were able to get a 30% grant for the 2029 collection system project. And really what you see is two things here. That's a marked difference from the first plan I showed. The first being that there is no debt-driven increase. The frontage fee goes from its current amount and it goes up 2% every year, and it's sufficient to pay for all the expenses we see. And the other thing you'll notice is that there is slightly more reserves going into the final year of the plan. So, I mean, I don't think people need much convincing, but a grant would be a great thing and make things a little bit easier on everyone. So what's up on the screen now is the 50-year fee comparison. And this just gives you an opportunity to really look at the differences between these three plans. And I've added the historical one on there just so you can see. What we can see here is if we do a little bit of an increase now, we end up paying less in the long term, and our rates stay a little bit lower. They don't have this debt-driven increase here. But if we get the grant, that's the best scenario, and that maintains the lowest fee. Any one of these four options, really even including the historical fee increase, we see a similar result. So this is what we can expect going forward for Canoe Road. So, as I was discussing earlier, we're looking to have a 5-year rate structure to create that cost certainty. This is a system I envision where every year we would tack on the 5th year, so people would know coming up, but that change wouldn't be in effect for 5 more years. And when I talk about a 5-year rate structure, this is the part of the graph we're considering. We're not thinking about the full 50-year one. It's a little bit much to commit to a full 50-year plan or 5 years at a time. And this is the numbers associated with these 5-year plans. In your far left column, you have user fees, and you can see those are marked with an asterisk at the top, and that's because this is subject to an annual review. As we get to know the Canoe Road plant and as the operations and maintenance reserve grows, we're going to feel comfortable dialing in this user fee accurately. Because the plant had such a small reserve balance and it's new, we had to make sure that we had enough money to operate it. As we go through each year, we will review this and make sure that user fee is accurate. And again, the operations and maintenance reserve contribution, that component is slated to last for 5 years. However, if the reserve gets to, I believe the target is $5,000 for the Canoe Road. Once it hits $5,000, we would no longer maintain a reserve contribution. We would just maintain the reserve. And then from there on, green, red, and purple plans, it might be a brown on your screen. We have the, in bold is the frontage fee, and then in the not bold is the total amount that we'll collect for the year for this system from each user. And as you can see, plans 1 and plans 3 are the same. And plan 2 over the next 5 years has some increases. Plan 3 would be the plan where we get a grant, but that would happen after the 8th or 9th year, and so you won't see it in the 5-year plan for a while. In all the plans, we can see that in the 5th year, it's actually the lowest amount collected, except for the plan 2, but it's near the lowest because we are losing the operations and maintenance reserve contribution. Now, this was another comment I got from Canoe Road residents. Based on the current anticipated operating budget for Canoe Road, this would be the user fee schedule. And I understand there has been some build out in the recent past, and it sounds like there's more houses being constructed. And so just some clarity on how many users and how that affects the user fee. This schedule just kind of shows how that works, but I would like to remind everyone that that operating budget is subject to an annual review. And as I said, as we learn the plant and maintain it for several years, we'll be have a better handle on what the costs of operating that plant are. So just talk about some upcoming work we have. We're going to finalize the capital funding model and make sure that we haven't missed anything. Wherever possible, we'll continue to pursue grant opportunities for future work. We'll be presenting a 5-year rate structure to the board for their consideration. And on an annual basis, we'll review the operations and maintenance budget and make sure this capital plan is in its right place and heading in the right direction. My main takeaway points from tonight's presentation are that the current rates are not financially sustainable. Um, Although for Canoe Road, I would say they're getting pretty close. There's multiple ways to finance a 50-year capital expenditures, but you know, uh, we're kind of getting to the point with Canoe Road and the simplicity of it that they all end up in the same place. And by doing an annual review, we will maintain the most up-to-date information and make sure that the estimates and the values we're using are accurate. So this concludes my presentation. There are several places you can get information if you have questions at the end of this. You can go to the webpage for Canoe Road, which is scrd.ca/canoe-road. The overarching wastewater webpage for the SCRD is scrd.ca/wastewater. Or you can just email us and ask your question, and we'll find the information and send it back to you. And the easiest way to do that is to email info@scrd.ca. So I'm going to be here for a few minutes for questions. I don't see a lot of participants in the Zoom room, and I don't imagine the YouTube people are frantically typing emails right now. So if you have any questions, send an email and we'll get to it as soon as we can. And otherwise, I look forward to talking to you in the near future. I don't think we're going to have any questions as there's no one in the Zoom room right now. So I'm going to say goodnight here. Thank you for everyone for coming and watching, and I look forward to your questions if you have them.